He buried her under the lone cedar tree before the dawn broke. The ground was hard, and his hands were bleeding when it was done. Not a wife. Not a lover. Just a woman who had once trusted him with her heart, and he had failed her. The prairie wind mourned with him, whispering through the grass, soft as a prayer. From that day forward, the cowboy spoke little, drank less, and carried silence like a saddle too heavy to set down. He rode until his horse stumbled and the sky turned gold again, settling near a cabin no one cared to claim. There, he built a life out of penance and distance, hammering each nail like an apology to the earth. Seasons changed. Grass grew high around the fences. He mended them each spring, watched dust rise each evening. He told himself it was enough, until he saw her. She moved through the tall grass like memory itself, gathering roots and herbs, her presence both strange and familiar. Her hair caught the wind, dark and restless. She must have been 28, though time had written her older. She carried the calm of someone who had been broken and learned to live with the crack. He did not speak the first day he saw her, nor the next. But the third day, he nodded. She nodded back. The gesture, small as a breath, was the beginning of something neither had planned to name. He learned her name from a boy in town, Ayanna, the daughter of a fallen chief. The boy said she lived between worlds, not quite belonging to either. She traded herbs for coffee, mended clothes for coins, spoke English with care, as if each word had to earn its right to be said. The settlers called her a witch. The cowboys called her cursed. But when she spoke, her voice carried more truth than any sermon the town had ever heard. The cowboy watched her from his porch, not out of suspicion but something quieter, a recognition of the same ache. He had lost someone he never learned to love right. She had been loved by someone who never stayed. Pain knows its kind. One evening, while fixing a broken fence post, he found her standing near the edge of his land, a bundle of wild sage in her hands. "You should burn this," she said, her voice low. "Keeps the snakes away." He nodded, unsure whether she meant the creatures or the men in town. Days folded into weeks. She began leaving herbs on his porch, sage, lavender, little things that smelled of peace. He left tobacco and dried meat by the edge of her field. No words. No promises. Just small trades, as if the land itself were passing messages between them. Sometimes he'd see her at dusk, watching the horizon. The sky would burn gold behind her, and he'd think she looked like something carved from the earth itself. Steady, unyielding, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. But he'd never say it. Words had betrayed him once. He'd sworn never to use them carelessly again. Then came the whispers. The men in town had seen her leaving herbs near his gate. They laughed over whiskey, saying she'd put a spell on him. He said nothing, but the laughter stayed with him longer than he wanted. By week's end, they started calling her the witch who caught the cowboy. He found her by the river the next day, washing cloth in silence. The current was strong, the air heavy with the smell of wet grass. He told her what the men were saying. She didn't flinch. "Let them talk," she said. "The river doesn't stop for gossip." He wanted to believe her, but the old ache of shame burned in his chest. That night, he couldn't sleep. The memory of the woman under the cedar tree clawed its way back into his dreams. The way people had looked at him after her death, suspicion first, then pity. He could not live through that again. When dawn came, he walked to her cabin. She opened the door before he knocked, as if she'd known he'd come to end something before it began. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. She touched his hand, light, brief, enough to make the air tremble. Then she turned away. By the time the sun rose high, he was gone. No farewell, no trace but a note pinned to her basket of herbs. The ink was faint, the letters shaky. "It's better this way." She read it once, twice. Her lips did not move, but her heart did. The wind picked up, scattering the note into the dust. For a long while she stood there, unmoving, the prairie wide and endless around her. Then she knelt, gathered the torn pieces of paper, and pressed them to her chest. Above her, a hawk cried. The wind shifted west. She closed her eyes, whispering something ancient under her breath, a promise, a warning, maybe both. When she rose, her face was calm again, but her shadow stretched long and dark across the grass, as if it had begun to move without her. The fire came before the apology. Ayanna woke to the sound of hooves, shouts, and the snapping of branches. Her cabin door rattled beneath a heavy fist, then the crack of a gun split the night. Smoke bled through the slats, thin at first, then thick and choking. She ran barefoot into the open, clutching the only thing she owned that mattered, a small pouch of medicine and her grandmother's song, the one she kept buried in her throat for safety. Flames leapt from the roof, painting the sky with rage. The men rode in circles around her, their torches hissing, their laughter coarse as sand. One called her a curse, another a thief of souls. None called her by name. She stood in the wind, defiant and trembling, whispering a prayer to the earth to remember her scent if she didn't survive the night. Then came the thunder, not from the sky, but from hooves pounding fast, furious, familiar. The cowboy broke through the circle, his horse slick with sweat, revolver raised. He didn't speak, just fired once into the air. The laughter stopped. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the men spat, muttered that she'd bewitched him, that he was lost like the rest of her kind. "Maybe I am," he said, his voice steady. "But at least I found something worth losing for." The men sneered, spat again, then rode off, leaving only smoke and the smell of burned pine. The cowboy dismounted slowly, his hand bleeding, his eyes hollow from the weeks he'd been gone. He looked thinner, older, like regret had chewed through his bones. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. "I shouldn't have left." He reached out, but she stepped back, her face pale with ash. "You think saving me erases the wound? You think fire burns only once?" "No," he said softly. "But I couldn't breathe knowing you might still trust me." They stood in silence, the ground still warm beneath their feet. The prairie stretched out dark and endless, the world holding its breath. He wanted to fall to his knees, to tell her how the road had punished him for his cowardice, how every mile away from her felt like walking through smoke that never cleared. But he knew words were fragile things, they shattered when spoken too soon. So instead, he began to help her. Together they hauled water from the river, throwing it over what remained of the cabin until the last ember died. Dawn came slow, tired. Ash clung to their skin like gray snow. When the fire was gone, the land smelled of sorrow and something else, forgiveness beginning to take shape. They sat side by side, watching the horizon. She asked where he had gone. He said nowhere that mattered. Men had told him she was dangerous. He'd believed them for a heartbeat too long, and it had cost him more than pride. "I came back because the silence hurt worse than their laughter." She nodded, eyes fixed on the sky. "You can't unhear the wind once it knows your name," she said. For the first time, she smiled, not in peace, but exhaustion. The smile of someone who had survived too much to fear another storm. The following days blurred into one another. He stayed near, rebuilding her shelter piece by piece. They spoke little. The air between them felt like a wound healing slowly, cautious of reopening. At night, they shared food by a small fire, not for warmth, but for the comfort of something alive between them. He told her about the woman under the cedar tree, how her death had taught him to run from tenderness. She told him of the man she once loved who chose another, how it made her doubt the worth of her own heart. Their griefs sat between them like two old dogs, no longer snarling, just breathing in rhythm. One evening, thunder rolled again, but this time from the sky. Rain began to fall, first gentle, then wild. She laughed, tilting her face upward, letting the water cleanse the ash from her skin. He watched, something breaking loose inside him. He stepped closer, not to hold her, but to stand within her storm. When the rain softened, she turned to him. The wind carried her voice just enough for him to hear. "I'm not all you wished for, but I'll love you." He reached for her hand, fingers trembling, eyes glistening like wet stone. "You're everything I stopped wishing for," he said. In the hush that followed, the prairie felt reborn, quiet, forgiving, infinite. The smell of rain lingered, the last smoke finally gone. They stood together, not lovers yet, but something truer, two souls unafraid of the same silence. Far in the distance, a figure watched from horseback, shadowed against the dark horizon. The sound of a match struck, faint and cruel. Somewhere, fire waited for its chance to return.